Welcome, everyone, to the captive audience. It is the 7th of April. Starting a few minutes late here, just had to resolve some technical issues. Yep, those are still happening, but we made it. We're here. There's some really good news to cover today, and I just want to share it with you because what's fascinating about what's going on is there's this national level of the news, and then there's Oregon, and Oregon is down. It's crazy, and with Portland at the heart of it in many cases, but not only Portland. So, why don't we start out with the national news? Because I think there's a lot of stuff to talk about, including a very important bit of breaking news, which is that the United States Supreme Court has overturned that Judge Boasberg, and sided with the Trump administration on deporting criminal gang members under a 1798 law called the Alien Enemies Act. It is an act that President Trump is using to deport gang members from the international criminal organization called Tren de Aragua. It is a group that was founded in the Venezuelan prison system, and they have certain tattoos. They took over apartment complexes, most notably in Colorado, but they operate throughout the United States in every major city, and they're vicious. They actually do use terror and intimidation to frighten people. They run all kinds of criminal enterprises, and they're illegal immigrants who should never have been let into the country. But Joe Biden didn't see a problem with it, or he didn't see anything at all, since he apparently some of the news last week made it clear that he wasn't really running anything and couldn't even get through the debate prep that he was doing. He'd get into the debate prep before that first debate that he had with President Trump and his last. He'd get 45 minutes into the debate, say, guys, I got to stop. I can't do this. And then go take a nap. That was the practice for the debate. Anyway, that means that people knew that he was incapable of fulfilling the functions of the presidency. And I think they're going to be held accountable. I think some of these people writing their tell-all books are going to be brought in front of Congress and questioned, and they should be. There actually should be a Senate and House joint committee formed to investigate who was actually running the United States government and what was known about Joe Biden's ability to function mentally and physically, for that matter. Because if you're falling asleep, it's not just because you're not all there mentally. It's you just physically can't do it. And they knew it, and they need to expose the cover up, and they need to get under oath, sworn testimony under oath from the people that were actually running the government. The people who were running the auto pen that did things like issued executive orders and issued pardons and signed bills and stuff that Joe Biden may have no recollection he ever did, and may not even be possible to find out if he knows. So they'd have to investigate whether he demonstrated contemporaneously that he knew he was signing anything, if there's any paper trail at all when an auto pen was used. Anyway, back to the news. The Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 ruling on Monday and handed President Trump a major victory because he's able to use the Alien Enemies Act. And it's a very old act. The issues around this act had already been settled in 1948, which limited judges' ability to interfere with the president under the law to a habeas petition. In other words, habeas is where you try to say, where is this person and what crime have they been charged with? It limited the High Court had already ruled in 1948 that the ability of judges, particularly district judges for that matter, to interfere with the Article 2 decision-making authority of the President of the United States was extremely limited, and therefore the Supreme Court's really just being consistent with this earlier ruling and says that the only competent authority to decide who qualifies under that law is the President of the United States. That's it. And the people that he designates in the executive branch to assist him in those judgments and execute them. So the gang members' lawyers tried to challenge the government's interpretation of the act and assert that they do not fall within the category of removable alien enemies. But they didn't get to those but we do not reach those arguments, the justices ruled. Challenges to removal under AEA, Alien Enemies Act, a statute which is largely precludes judicial review. And that's the must be brought in habeas. And so this is that's the 1948 ruling that they referred to. We talked for weeks and listened to leftists saying unconstitutional this and unconstitutional that. Oh, wait. No, constitutional since 1948 for sure, and around since 1798. So there you go. We're going to find that a lot of these other things are going to go that way. And this interference with the function of the executive branch really has to be slapped down. And I don't even think it's going to end up being as case by case as it is, because I think the district court judges need to be reined in. If the Supreme Court doesn't rein them in, then I think Congress should do it, or put Democrats on the record that they actually want federal district judges issuing nationwide injunctions controlling the executive branch, ordering planes to fly back to the United States, and all kinds of garbage like that. So anyway, the justices, it says, poignantly slammed the judge and the lawyers in the case for what is called judge shopping, stating plaintiffs are being held in a Texas detention center and have no right to have their case heard before Boasberg in Washington, D.C. The detainees are confined in Texas, so the venue is improper in the District of Columbia. Boom. This is really fascinating, because if they can really start to slap down this judge shopping stuff, not only can they start to get away from these leftist judges that seem to think that they are the law, and get away from people who will issue nationwide court injunctions. There's almost been none issued by judges appointed by Republicans. It's all these Democrats. And so that one, yeah, I know Trump Marjorie, you're right. Trump has been more constitutional than the Biden administration. In fact, frankly, the Biden administration hid what they were doing to interrupt our First Amendment, interfere with our First Amendment rights by trying to force private companies to censor speech, which the government, when they do that, uses a private company as an agent of the federal government through coercion. That's pretty darn unconstitutional. And they did it. They got away with it. They even covered up that they were doing it. And then finally they got exposed for it. So we're still learning just how unconstitutional the Biden administration was. And ultimately we may find that Joe Biden was a mental vegetable figurehead of the government, over which others are actually engaging in this unconstitutional activity, which may further jeopardize the actions that were taken. More news from the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts has halted the deadline for the Trump administration to return a man lawyers for a man they claim was wrongly deported. And though there's been some acknowledgement of some errors, perhaps, in deporting the man, this is really another test of whether or not the president and the people acting on his behalf in the executive branch have the authority they have to make these determinations, or if courts are going to go in and figure out in every case whether or not somebody was rightly or wrongly deported. And a lower court judge who did actually issue a ruling, I believe it was an Obama appointee. Let me see here. I know I saw it earlier. I looked her up, and what was interesting about her is that, again, another judge shopping situation. I don't see her here, but anyway, the judge who issued this order saying that this person should be returned from El Salvador in prison by 11:59 p.m. on Monday. But President Trump, the administration, asked the Supreme Court to get involved, and the Supreme Court has halted the lower court's ruling. So, and usually they do that because there has to be a hearing, and that there's at least a decent chance that the president in this case will prevail. So the ruling came from Judge Paula Zinnes, and that's the one I was talking about, an Obama appointee. And it looks like this guy Abrego Garcia, they're claiming was not actually associated with MS-13 or Tren de Aragua. However, that's a determination that might actually be only possible for the executive branch to make, especially with this Alien Enemies Act ruling. And so, because there's a whole bunch of other people that have been deported as well. Now, if it's a mistake and the administration says, well, you know what, he's perfectly legally able to remain in the United States, maybe they will bring him back. Or maybe they'll have him deported to another country instead of El Salvador. He might belong perhaps in Venezuela. But the bottom line is, with millions of people to deal with, at least 2 million people that have had their asylum cases, which was all these phony asylum cases where they claimed to be fearing for their life if they returned, and they were told by a bunch of NGOs and nonprofits that we paid for in most cases to claim that they feared for their lives, and all they wanted to do was come here and get a job somewhere in the United States or smuggle fentanyl. Those people are losing their cases, and the ones with criminal records should go immediately. The ones with that have lost their asylum cases have been ordered removed by an immigration judge, and if they haven't, then we're going to just have loads and loads of this. And the Democrats and their lawfare and the leftists and the progressives, they want to slow this down as much as possible and get the courts involved in every single case. And I think what we're going to see is hopefully executive authority restored. Now, what's concerning about this whole thing, really concerning, is that this is only a 5-4 ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court. When I look at the ruling, it kind of didn't mention the individual judges, but I would love to see who it is. And so I pulled up the Supreme Court ruling, and I just want to see if it has the vote here, because there are 6 technically conservative judges. You can count on the Democrat-appointed judges all sticking together. And it says Justice Jackson joined Justice Sotomayor in dissenting. It doesn't say. I think Sotomayor wrote the dissenting opinion, and it's a lot of blah, 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 which actually I don't believe she wrote. This is just my opinion. And if I look at who wrote, see, Justice Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson, and Amy Coney Barrett. Barrett joined in parts 2 and parts 3B in the dissent. Kagan, Jackson, and Sotomayor were the ones on the rest that agreed with everything in the dissent, basically, and some wrote their own. Justice Kavanaugh wrote the opinion of the ruling. So anyway, I do think that a lot of this is going to go through this court scrutiny, but as we know, it's like not even close between the number of times that courts have halted presidential actions and issued nationwide injunctions against the actions or ordered actions by the executive branch. It's like dozens and dozens and dozens of these took place while it's the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, there are already more than have been done against Biden, Obama, and others previous. And now they're going to town on this, filing even more against the Trump administration. And frankly, if the Supreme Court wants to go and get involved in the details of every single case, or they don't want to, they're going to have to start affirming presidential authority, because that's actually why we have an executive branch elected by the American people, the president, who then decides all these people that are functioning under him to execute the law and his authority. If they don't affirm presidential authority, then they're going to actually be, the courts are going to find themselves getting involved in running every detail of the executive branch. And it's simply, if anybody can see on its face, that's unconstitutional. Shifting gears here, it looks like an appeals court has federal appeals court has ruled that DOJ is allowed to access sensitive information from multiple federal agencies. The American Federation of Teachers accused the Trump administration of violating the federal privacy laws by giving DOJ access to these systems with personal information of millions of Americans without their consent. That's what they claimed. But a federal appeals court on Monday reinstated DOJ's access to this sensitive information. And U.S. District Judge Deborah Boardman issued a preliminary injunction last month blocking the department's access to information at the Education Department, the Treasury Department, and the Office of Personnel Management, ruling that the Trump administration failed to justify why it needs such data. I don't think there's anything that's been more explained than the need that DOJ has and the authority that DOJ has given by the president to do what the president actually is responsible for doing, which is ensuring that the will of Congress expressed in the law on the budget is executed, and that it's absent of corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse. And of course, they found tons of it. Democrats are simply denying that any of it's true, which is good at defrauding progressives who, want to be defrauded. They don't want to believe these things, but they're going to have to face the facts at some point because they won't be able to contest them. And the thing that I heard about over the weekend was that, of course, that they found 5 million people with Social Security numbers who are not citizens, who are most certainly illegal immigrants in most cases. And they actually found the process by which illegal immigrants are issued Social Security numbers rather rapidly after they enter the country and are given a work permit. And then they cross-referenced that with the voter database and found out that in several states, which were cooperative with the effort of probing these voter databases, they found many, many thousands of people who had registered, and many of them had voted. And so some of it's actually so easy. Once you have a social security number and card, and you have you can present a utility bill, you're registered to vote, and they don't bother checking your citizenship status, and they really can't. They don't have a way to do it in most cases. In some states, says they don't want to know. So DOJ found that, and Democrats are going to say it's not true, and they can prove it. They just simply provide the data and present it, and report it to Congress, and I think what's going to happen is Democrats are going to continue in this denial phase. Anyway, 3 appeals court judges in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned Deborah Boardman's decision. Judge Stephen Agee argued that Boardman misread legal precedent, which requires, quote, nothing more than the abstract access to personnel information to establish a concrete injury, and that the government demonstrated, quote, a strong showing that it is likely to succeed on the merits of their appeal, unquote. Judge Julius Richardson sided with Agee on this opinion, but said more information was needed to prove that the access was actually necessary. Both judges were appointed by Republican presidents. One of the judges that dissented out of the 3, it's a 3-judge panel, Judge Robert King was naturally appointed by Bill Clinton. So really, I mean, just think of the past battles over the justice system and judges and how much that's turned out to be absolutely critical. Every single justice has been necessary in the Supreme Court to make sure that we could get the rulings that restore the rule of law and the Constitution. And then even in the lower courts, it's a historic thing, because imagine if all of them were just dominated by liberals who just make up the law as they go. We wouldn't have a justice system, and we would have the president's power to be the executive under the Constitution would be gutted. And frankly, some of Congress's power is being curtailed as all this goes on too. So, unelected judges and justices, by definition, are supposed to have limited authority. When they say Democrats say it's anti-democratic, they're anti-democratic, because they're the ones that are saying you can't do this, you can't do that. And yet that was clearly the will of the American people, and it falls specifically under the authority of the president of the executive branch. The other thing that's kind of going on at the national level right now is a debate about tariffs and the efficacy and wisdom and goals of the tariffs that President Trump has imposed. Last Thursday, what the president dubbed as Liberation Day, tariffs were imposed on basically countries all over the world. And they were described as reciprocal tariffs, although there was a tariff, I think, of 10% that was applied across the board, and then additional tariffs. But in most cases, tariffs that didn't actually match or exceed the amount of tariffs those countries had put on the United States. So in other words, we still haven't done it to them as much as they've been doing it to us, but it is triggered a bunch of countries contacting the president once they found out he was serious, that the kick me sign that Biden stuck on Uncle Sam is gone. And now he's got dozens and dozens of countries contacting him and saying, we want to talk. So he's triggered, in some cases, negotiations. And Scott Bessent, who is the Treasury Secretary, announced that President Trump has asked him to help lead the U.S.'s trade negotiations with Japan. And over 50 countries have responded. The country of Japan is apparently very open to this. And finally, they believe that President Trump is prepared to do what's necessary to restore a free and fair trade as a result of showing that he's serious about tariffs. There's also non-tariff barriers that some countries engage in. Japan is a great example. We can't sell any cars there. They sell millions here, right? Now, many of theirs are produced here, but then they've got a lot of parts that come from Japan and elsewhere. But we have cars that we manufacture that would be competitive or should be allowed to compete, and they aren't. So U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer is going to lead on the ground the negotiations, and the goal is to get allies, especially our closest allies, on board with the idea that we're going to have constructive engagement and we're going to reduce these barriers between us so that America can compete on a level playing field across all these different kinds of products. China responded. Instead of saying they want to negotiate, they said they imposed a 34% tariff over and above what they have already imposed in the United States. And President Trump responded by saying, well, then you're going to get a 50% increase in tariffs if you don't withdraw the 34% that, and apparently this is going to be April 8th. So if they don't do it by tomorrow, China will see another 50% effective April 9th. And so he's serious. Another country that has responded very positively to the imposition of these tariffs is Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu visited with President Trump today, and what he did was he he said, we need to eliminate the trade deficit with the United States. And we intend to do it very quickly. And they want to get down to a free trade situation between the two countries. And this is finally countries that, you know, we have close allied relationships with in many other respects, where they're going to treat us like we're friends now on trade. And I think it's actually a very good sign. And if this is how it works out across a whole range of these cases, then this is reordering the globalist world order that had the United States as the sucker who would allow everyone else to impose trade barriers against our goods while we allowed theirs to flow into our country relatively free and without tariffs. And so it's going to take a while. And President Trump actually said, look, don't be weak or stupid. Don't panic amid these negotiations. Don't panic, because we are going to find a way to ameliorate the situation. He said, don't be a panican, a new party based on weak and stupid people. Be strong, courageous, and patient, and the greatness will result, he said. He said, countries all over the world are talking to us, but tough, fair parameters are being set. And he spoke to the Japanese prime minister this morning, and immediately this whole thing initiated with, we're going to start negotiating. But we're going to start negotiating where we've got leverage and not begging people to do something they think we won't do anyway. Not anymore. I definitely believe it. So I think this is a sign that at least the initial strategy, VAT is also a serious problem, but I think also that's something that we can resolve. It has a little bit more to do with how taxation is done in some countries, and I think it's going to be resolved pretty effectively too. And I think that so many people around the world now know that America is putting itself first and demands that they at least treat us like allies and friends across the board, and not somebody who's there to bail them out or support them or sacrifice our economic well-being so that they can all go do things like have giant welfare states with 5 weeks of vacation, right? So, I mean, this is a renegotiation of most of the trade agreements that exist in the world, is what it is. And we're doing it with the strength and leverage of the United States. And if people want to, people in leading other countries want to cooperate on this, they can. And if they want a big fight, then they'll have a big fight. And we'll see what happens, as President Trump likes to say. In other news, important news, President Trump says that the U.S. will engage in direct talks with Iran about its nuclear program. He said that we're talking to them directly, and maybe a deal is going to be made. Doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious, which he was, of course, referring to the likelihood that there would be military action to end or curtail or delay the Iranian nuclear program, which I guess they're very close to having a nuclear weapon at this point. And so there's a lot of pressure on Iran now, pressure that didn't exist at all during the Biden administration. And part of that pressure has been to bomb the Houthis in Yemen, who were firing upon and shutting down shipping through the Suez Canal, to bomb them into the Stone Age. Now, they weren't living much out of the Stone Age, but they weren't using Stone Age weapons to do what they were doing to shipping. They were using Iranian built rockets and missiles and drones. And Iran's been told in no uncertain terms, stop it. And there's a military buildup, believe it or not, going on in the Middle East. We have sent over, we got 3 carriers heading to the Middle East, 3. Also a guided missile sub, the Ohio-class guided missile sub that can fire like 140 cruise missiles, something insane. And, you know, this is what leverage looks like. This is what peace through strength looks like. And I think there's a golden opportunity here to demonstrate what a real foreign policy looks like. I'm optimistic that we can get many of these situations under control and moving in the right direction very quickly. And, I think that he actually addressed this issue while he had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu there for a press conference after they met. And of course, there's a lot of alignment between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. President Trump said Iran is going to be in great danger. I hate to say it. If talks aren't successful, it's going to be a very bad day for Iran. Just think how much strength could make a difference here, and frankly, avert real danger and wider wars. We could really end up with another era of peace once these countries that thought they could do whatever they want under Biden start to get the message that new sheriff in town, it's over. And by the way, I did already mention about China and those tariffs, but just to kind of put a bow on this, just the way Reagan secured peace through strength and ended the Cold War, President Trump was actually betting that he can achieve prosperity the same way. And look, there are critics who do have a good point about how ultimately tariffs are probably not the best way to raise revenue in the long run for the federal government. That its effects can be inflationary. That there is a downside, that there could be the country could tip into a bit of a recession because of this. There are people making valid points to that effect, but also President Trump, I think, is thinking of what's really important for the country, not just in the short term, but in the medium and long term, that we're going to make sure we reindustrialize many sectors of our economy, that such as our pharmaceuticals being produced in China. That was a bad move. We found that out during COVID. Our defense industrial complex is just simply not up to the task of supplying our own military, much less being the one that can supply all these countries such as Europe that simply lack it altogether almost right now. And so everyone's counseling patience and vision on this one. But as they say, it's the economy, stupid. We need to keep an eye on that, because even the Democrats know nothing about the economy. Suffice it to say, they will just simply jump on a bandwagon of blame if they can get away with it. Meanwhile, Congress has a job to do, and it looks like there was a standoff that was going on over proxy voting in the House. I think that one has been put aside, and it's been blocked from a floor vote. So now they're going to get back to their number one job, which I think is actually what they should be doing, which is voting on the budget resolution that will allow us to preserve and extend the Trump tax cuts, the 2017 tax cuts. And, when people talk to you about this is really a move not to cut taxes for the wealthy, because it affects nearly everybody. And it's also not to cut taxes, it's to keep taxes from going back up, which is what the Democrats would absolutely love. And that'd be a huge hit to the economy if we could not renew those tax cuts. And so both the House and the Senate are doing this. The Senate had their budget resolution passed on Saturday. The Senate rules allow for amendments to be brought. And once those amendments are exhausted through what they call vote-a-rama, where they just keep voting and voting and voting like all night and into the early morning, and then they get to the final budget resolution and they passed it. I think there were only 2 votes against it. Rand Paul, who disagrees with tariffs that are somehow included in the budget resolution, And I believe it was Susan Collins who voted against the rest of it. So this is something that, there's always going to be, when you're in a majority, you're going to lose a few people on your side sometimes. And hopefully they stick with you on the really, really critical stuff where their votes are needed. But the House is going to be taking up, I believe, the Senate resolution that was passed as early as Wednesday. And there could still be some negotiation and some back and forth, because it looks like several Republicans in a very closely divided House, where I think they can only lose maybe 3 votes before and still pass a resolution. There's going to be some back and forth about this, but the House is going to get back in business trying to do this. And so stay tuned, watch for that this week. And I think that if they stay focused on the most important stuff and get that done and deliver, they can make permanent many of the things ultimately that President Trump's doing with executive orders and executive action, plus investigate what's going on with a lot of this stuff, and then make it very difficult to repeat much of the same fraud, waste, and abuse that we saw that DOJ has captured. They have a lot to do. By the way, one other court decision I wanted to mention that did kind of go against President Trump is an appeals court has blocked the Trump administration from firing 2 labor board members in the National Labor Relations Board, and ordered that they be reinstated as soon as possible. However, this has been appealed to the Supreme Court, and it probably won't be resolved until the Supreme Court rules on it, because the appeals court cited a Supreme Court ruling that they used as a precedent, saying that the president does not have the power to remove members of adjudicatory boards, which is, I guess, boards that have the power to decide about certain things. Little vague on that one, but so this is going to go back to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court itself will determine whether or not this applies to this precedent applies to the instance that's being cited here. But it is concerning, because if the president can't fire these guys other than for cause, then we're going to have people that are sort of invulnerable to firing, even though ultimately the president of the United States has to be able to exercise the power of under his Article 2 powers of executing the laws and the policies of the United States that are his purview. That's what he's supposed to do. So I guess we're going to find out where that happens. That could affect a lot of the stuff that like the FCC and the FEC and even roles like the FBI director and so on could be affected by this down the road, where Congress has tried to curtail the president's ability to terminate people in certain functions. And I guess we're going to see if the Supreme Court concurs. The president did fire some national security officials very recently over concerns about whether they're actually loyal to his policies. And this is a good sign, because we know back during his first term, he had people lingering in the administration, even at the highest level, that were constantly undermining him, leaking things to the media, and sometimes just openly saying they didn't agree with him and weren't going to do what he said. So 6 national security staffers have been canned. And this happened after a meeting that President Trump had with one activist and new media person named Laura Loomer. She reportedly presented the president with research that she had put together at a meeting this past Wednesday about the staffers she found to be disloyal to him. And the names of the staffers who were fired have not been public, but I do believe that one of the people, so J.D. Vance, Mike Waltz, and Susan Wiles were all present at the meeting with Loomer. And the National Security Council says they don't discuss personnel matters, but we do know that the head of the NSA was canned last week. So that could be one of the people that was involved with this. And so, this is good because in the past, people would just continue hanging in there and doing whatever they thought, implementing their own policies instead of those of the president. A piece of news, which we'll have to see how this plays out, is there's President Trump has a plan to override the California gas car ban, but it's been blocked somehow by the Senate parliamentarian, the U.S. Senate parliamentarian. So he has a plan to override the late Biden-era waiver approving California's 2035 ban on gas-powered cars. There are 12 states and the District of Columbia who are doing this ban. Oregon's one of them. They had a major roadblock, however, it says, because the Senate parliamentarian ruled the act is not subject to standard congressional review. In passing the Clean Air Act on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis, Congress explicitly granted California the ability to set more stringent vehicle emission standards to protect public health from California's unique air quality challenges. What's absurd about this, what's completely nutty about this, is that they're claiming that carbon dioxide has something to do with air quality. And that, I think, might face some other challenges and determinations here, because somebody can classify carbon dioxide as a pollutant, but they cannot say that air quality has been jeopardized. You are breathing carbon dioxide right now, and you are exhaling it, even more importantly, and plants are breathing it in. And that's not something you can say about sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and all the other pollutants that do affect air quality. So that lead to smog. There's no CO2 leading to smog. So that's what's kind of crazy about this. Anyway, it looks like that has to do with something that was done in the House, which is waivers that are in the House could still make their way to the Senate. And so we'll have to see what happens. But that's some news just to give you an idea that there's just a lot happening all at the same time right now. Meanwhile, let's turn back to Oregon, and I'll hit a few treetops here before we wrap up. Oregon Democrats on Friday unveiled a $1.9 billion transportation funding plan. And I use the word transportation loosely because they keep raising taxes and they don't actually do all the stuff they said they were going to do on transportation. They don't even fix the potholes. They don't expand the roadways. They haven't fixed the Rose Quarter in Portland, which is in 2017, that was one of the main reasons why they raised taxes. And they still haven't done it. They're still in the midst of doing some construction, but they frankly have plowed a lot of this stuff into woke green climate change programs, which apparently haven't done anything to cool the earth, if you haven't noticed. But what it would do is it would jack up how much you're paying at the pump by 20 cents a gallon. Higher fees when you buy a car, a bike. You'll see more money deducted from paychecks to pay for transit, and more. They say that the money is going to go to the state highway fund, and we've heard that story before. And they say they're going to. They mentioned the Rose Quarter Highway improvement, the Abernathy Bridge replacement, all the stuff that they aren't really getting done. And so when they don't get stuff done, they say the problem is we need more money and more time. They always say that. When they fail, that's what they say. And people have really, frankly, had it with being screwed around with like this. The Oregon Department of Transportation actually has predicted that they will have an immediate deficit of $350 million in meeting what they say are the construction costs of the state and local governments that they're obligated to do, and that they are seeing gas tax revenues decline right now because people are switching to more efficient vehicles, and they're deciding that on their own. The ODOT might have to lay off 1,000 employees. I would say that's actually probably a good start, because given the fact that they've rapidly expanded and they aren't getting stuff done, and about a third of ODOT's money is being spent in some places in the state on just cleaning up trash from homelessness. If they get down to, and they say they don't have the money to plow roads, by the way. So we had a very fortunate winter season this year where they didn't have to do as much plowing, but they also told us they wouldn't do it. So we've got the transportation co-chairs, Gorsuch and McLean, Susan McLean from Forest Grove, and Gorsuch from Troutdale, saying this is what it is. What this is really is, it's them saying, figuring out how they can raise taxes and say it's going to do a bunch of stuff for transportation, and some people will be fooled by it and some won't. Registration fees would increase by $90 for vehicles, cars, and electric vehicle drivers who now pay more, $192 for a title and $316 for registration, but their registration costs might go down as they enrolled in a road user charge program and paid an annual flat fee. So I don't know what that means, but 2 cents per mile fee. Anyway, they list up all this stuff. It's insane that Democrats are raising taxes, but they know that their federal funding is probably going to be curtailed, especially the stuff that they weren't spending on transportation. By the way, they brought back this tax on tires that everybody thought was dead, a 3% tax on tire sales, which that's a lot of money. They were going to do 4%. Now they said they're going to do 3%. The current payroll tax that everybody pays for transit that almost no one's using. I just saw a train earlier today going along, a MAX train, and there were like 3 people in it. And I'm riding on the highway, and frankly, that rate of usage for a form of transportation that expensive, they're just going to get more money to keep doing it. That's what they're going to get. But the 3% tax on tires would provide $50 million to fund more rail. Apparently, wildlife crossings and salmon restoration are a super high priority for people that think they're paying money for transportation, and super high priority for people that are buying tires. Bicycles will see the tax go from $15 to $24.50. So they're going to punish bicycles, which last I heard is a pretty low carbon option, but they don't really care. And so this is really Democrats raising taxes. Republicans are calling them out, but people need to know that Democrats really are going to start raising all their taxes, because they are going to be forced to face the cost of all the stuff they've been doing, which isn't working. A commentary in the Oregon Capitol Chronicle says Governor Tina Kotek appears to have a clear path through the next election. It goes on to say that even though Tina Kotek's popularity has been low, even by national standards, a poll conducted in Oregon by DHM researchers, as a Democrat-leaning outlet, showed that Tina Kotek has a 42% favorable rating and a 40% unfavorable rating, which, Morning Consult is the other one that does this. I think it's a quarterly, or maybe it's monthly, and they check all the approval ratings of all the governors in the country. So, they're making the argument that she is not super popular, has a high unpopularity rating, but is likely to still um, have good prospects for reelection. And they analyze some of the reasons why this is, looking back at some of the history of the state. So, plus it will be a presidential midterm. We know that progressives are foaming at the mouth, spreading lies about what's going on with Doge and President Trump and all of that. And they're more or less being fed this stuff as a daily feature all the time. But in breaking news on Friday, Tina Kotek's wife, Amy Kotek Wilson, registered as a lobbyist. And there's a lot of questions around this because there was this whole controversy about trying to create an office of the first spouse about a year plus ago, and they were going to spend $200,000, or did spend $200,000 to send Kotek Wilson to a conference with the governor, only attended by 28 people, to talk about healthcare issues. And there was an ethics investigation about using government resources that were not legal for an office that doesn't exist. And now, when you register as a lobbyist, usually that means you're getting paid to do something. You're earning money or having some expenses defrayed in order to represent a group or an entity or point of view. She's registered as a lobbyist on behalf of the governor's office. So there's a lot of questions to answer, because the excuse they gave why she was doing this is because she simply offered testimony on one bill last Wednesday. One. And none of us can see any reason why someone would register as a lobbyist when anyone can go and testify on a single bill anytime they want. And you don't have to register as a lobbyist to do that. So there's a lot more questions to answer. Willamette Week did kind of a cover story that was leaked by the Kotek administration, and the governor's on a hiring spree right now. So while the private economy has been shedding jobs here in Oregon, she's hired 1,200 state government workers. And so I guess now they just need to add Kotek's wife to the list of people that are going to be making money off of representing somebody in Salem. Anyway, sorry about that. I'm almost wrapped up here, but Senator Bonham has spoken out on the recent ruling that took place about the Grants Pass decision, and said that this judge, he believes that the judge has ignored the Supreme Court and how it ruled on the Grants Pass decision. And so an Oregon judge is overstepping their role by issuing a preliminary injunction that stops the city of Grants Pass from enforcing its own camping restrictions. It's a thoughtful piece. I think you should read it. This is where, we finally got essentially the Boise decision revised by the Supreme Court. And now, which is a federal decision that usually imposed things on cities and states, saying that they had to always provide for some location for someone to move before you could remove homeless campers in your city on public property. But and it's Fox News did an interview saying that this is a demoralizing decision. But this is and this is somebody who's critical of the liberal approach to what they've been doing on homelessness, which has totally failed, as we can see. But it's also where, a judge in Oregon is ignoring the federal decision and taking matters into his own hands. Got to call him out. We got to make a decision. We got to make a difference on this one. Governor Kotek, the one with the straight path to victory, according to the Oregon Capitol Chronicle, has targeted more apartment construction, but here's the result: less apartment construction. Why? The government itself is the barrier. And there's a really good article about this, that even liberal entities are having to admit that as the governor says she's doing more and demanding more in terms of construction, she's actually getting less and less permits are being issued. Um, and so the homelessness is actually a government caused phenomena in part. And the governor, who says she's going to build 36,000 new homes per year, apparently isn't getting the job done. We'll see if that becomes an election issue. It should be. There's news that a trans track athlete here in Oregon is beating the crap out of the varsity girls in competition. And this is somebody who previously was placing last in the against junior varsity boys. And then someone named Leah Rose, who used to be Zachary Rose, has decided that he is a woman and therefore is now going to compete with women in Oregon. He competed as a sophomore in track, and he lost by over a minute to his competitor in the 3,000 meter race. Now he's setting records as a high jumper and outpacing all of the women in the track and field competitions. And all these girls who are actually older and more mature than he is, he's defeating them. And so I think we saw what happened with the state of Maine, and maybe Oregon's going to face this now too, since we know Maine said they weren't going to do anything about trans athletes competing in women's sports, men and women's sports. If Oregon keeps this up, maybe its federal funding will be cut off. We'll see what happens. There's a good article I just want to bring to your attention saying Oregon's high static estate tax is actually chasing away wealthy retirees. And this is according to it says the Common Sense Institute of Oregon. I am not that familiar with anything called the Common Sense Institute, but I do know that several groups are actually trying to do something about this, and that the cost of this is actually probably net driving people with wealth out of the state who are concerned that Oregon is too expensive a place to die because of what will happen to money that could be inherited by people coming in your family that would inherit it. And this is, by the way, money that's already had tax paid on it. Fahey and Attorney General Rayfield, this is the last story I'm going to cover tonight. They're hosting a public forum at the University of Oregon on Wednesday. And it could be fascinating because they say they're holding a federal oversight forum. Neither one of them, by the way, is a federal government elected official, but they're going to provide federal oversight and accountability. And so there's going to be some kind of discussion going on. You can attend it Wednesday, April 9th at 6:30 p.m. at the University of Oregon. It's at the Prince Lucien Campbell Hall in Eugene. And he's going to blather on about challenging federal overreach while failing to do anything to secure the state against the crime wave that's hit it and the number one destination for drug smuggling and drug addicted homeless driven crime in the country. That's Dan Rayfield. So Oregon Speaker Julie Fahey, who's from Eugene, and Dan Rayfield are going to speak at University of Oregon. Let's see if they actually take questions from people who disagree with them, or if those people in the audience just shout them down. Anyway, take a look at that. And if you're in that area, please go and attend it. Thank you for watching tonight. I hope this is a good show. I covered a lot of stuff, and this is literally just looking at the news for 10 minutes. I found all of this. But you've got to share this with others because not enough people know all this is happening, and they actually hardly can even keep up with all this news. But if you don't keep up with it and you don't take action on what you hear, your taxes are going to go up. The cost of buying tires, driving your car, renewing your license, and all these problems that are going on in the state will continue to get worse because, and frankly, some of our federal officials will aid and abet and block President Trump from solving the problems that we know he's actually bothering to solve, unlike here in Oregon where they're making them worse. So share the show with everyone you can. And again, thank you for watching. Have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow night on the next episode of The Captive Audience. I will be pre-recording that show, but it's going to be a good one with Jeff Eager, who is with Oregon Roundup and one of the most incisive people out there, who writes this blog and does his podcast. And I love having him on. He's a regular. So anyway, have a great night, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow night.